For many reasons now, going to a psychiatrist, probably the most dangerous thing you can do in the Western world, other than, do something illegal.
Maybe you remember I invited you to Denmark some 25 years ago, Peter Breggin. My name is Carl.
Hi!
Yeah, that was, I think, in 89 when you traveled in Scandinavia.
Yes, I went to Norway too, and Sweden.
Yeah, you went to Sweden and Norway also, yes. You brought your son with you. But I always admired you to speak up loud about the brain disabling epidemic caused by psychiatric drugs and electroshock. And you have done incredible things all these years. What I want to ask you is, did it work? Do you think, did we influence the public? Did we influence the real world? Did things change to the better or to the worse? And what's your evaluation about the coming years? Will we succeed to end this epidemic within our lifetime or something like that?
That's a great way for me to start the second part. When I first started talking about issues like this, I conducted an international campaign to stop psychosurgery. And then I went on to take on shock treatment and the antipsychotic drugs. When I started, times were extremely different. My life was repeatedly threatened. I had bodyguards. I had the FBI come in to investigate threats. When I would go on television, I would be ambushed. I'd end up with 4 people attacking me. Audiences were very threatening. Psychiatrists were slandering and libeling me in the press. I sued one of the more big ones, Leo Alexander in Boston, and he settled for a lot of money. Then they stopped slandering me and libeling me. Times have vastly changed since then. There are many, many people, first of all, doing wonderful work. Peter, Gøtzsche, Robert Whitaker, many, many people, Matthew Downing. I mean, I wouldn't even know where to begin talking about all the people in the audience. And the attitude of the public has hugely changed. In the United States, I get standing ovations instead of having to have a bodyguard. Now, that doesn't mean the profession has changed at all. And again, I think if you look at it in terms of, say, the Soviet Union or slavery in the US, as public opinion turns against the Politburo or against the slaveholders, they get tougher. They get more slaves. They get more oppressive. So psychiatry is probably the worst I've ever seen it. The most stupid, the most ignorant, the most totally at odds with Western civilization and all that's good in humanity, completely opposed to freedom, autonomy, love, spirituality. Psychiatry is the worst it's been. It's very much like the psychiatry that took over in Germany when Hitler came. The psychiatrists loved Hitler. There were more psychiatrists joined Hitler, percentage-wise, than any other group, and that's another story I could come back and tell you. I've lectured on that in Germany, actually. So psychiatry is worse than ever. They'll start doing a lot of lobotomies again if we don't speak up. Shock treatment's rampant. But the public is so much more aware. Everywhere I go, people thank me. Everywhere I go, people tell me horror stories. It doesn't matter whether it's a man repairing a roof of my house or if it's a waitress in a restaurant. People have gotten the idea, at least in the US, that this system isn't working. But more and more people are in the system, ironically, because psychiatry has revved up and gotten worse. The drug companies are pouring more money into advertising. So you have 2 separate camps evolving now. The people who are against this whole system, or at least very suspicious of it, and the system. And both, I think, are increasing We will never change the system. You don't make the Politburo into nice people. You don't make slaveholders into freedom lovers. You have to do something to stop them. I think the most obvious way it's going to stop is people stop going. Like the song about war. What if nobody went? But I also think we need to be very active in other ways. I'm very active in the legal system. I do a great deal of legal work that draws attention to what they're doing, that punishes them for what they're doing, but the goal is just to do honorable legal work. So that's my answer to that question. It's a kind of complicated one. I want to get a little more systematic now and cover some things about my theory about psychopharmacology. All of this is in my books. It's in my big book, the medical book, Brain Disabling Treatments in Psychiatry, with thousands of references at the end. And it's also in my latest book, summarized in the first half of Psychiatric Drug Withdrawal. The most important principle to understand about psychiatric drugs is not very complicated, but I see hardly anyone except Joanna Moncrief in Great Britain, the psychiatrist, they are building on this principle. Yet it's the most fundamental principle, and that is that psychiatric drugs only can work by disabling the brain. There are no psychoactive substances that improve your marvelous brain, period. Not nicotine, not even caffeine, certainly not marijuana or street drugs, and even more than any other drugs, the psychiatric drugs, because they're tailored to get across the blood-brain barrier and do as much damage as possible. They're tailored to do that. So what does it mean when a psychiatric drug works? Well, it means it's disabled the person's brain. It might be your own brain. Let's say you have a few drinks to fall asleep at night. I don't begrudge you that as long as you know what you're doing, but you're doing it by disabling your brain, and it's no different if you take some benzos to go to sleep at night. They affect very similar neurotransmitter systems. So that's the basic, most important principle about psychopharmacology. And I hope all of you will begin to use it more when you write and think and talk. As a part of that, a corollary to that, is that no drugs improve brain function. So all the psychoactive substance disrupt it and no drugs improve it. Now, why does a disability get to be seen as an improvement? I'm going to go through the various classes of drugs and talk to you about that. But first I want to cover two other principles that will go into your understanding. One principle is what I call medication spellbinding. When I write about it in scientific articles or in my books, all my articles are on my website for free. When I write about it, I call it intoxication anosognosia, not knowing you're intoxicated. When we take a psychoactive substance, we lose our capacity to judge its effect on us. Any of you who have ever been at a party where everybody but you is smoking marijuana, you'll find that the profound statements being made are absolutely silly, and the cookies don't taste all that good. It's all the misleading effects of the drug. The person who thinks they're the life of the party on alcohol may be ruining their business and social relationships. Alcoholics commonly drive cars believing that the drug really doesn't impair them. It's the same with psychiatric drugs. I often will see a couple, and let's say the husband will say, I've been doing better since I've been on antidepressants the last couple of years. And I'll notice there's a little flatness in what he's saying. Doesn't have that sparkle of the human treasure there. And maybe his wife will say, well, you know, honey, I know that you seem to feel you're better, but we haven't made love in 2 years. And you don't even play with the dog anymore. The man, meanwhile, all he knows is that he's had some relief of pain through the anesthesia. Really, it becomes apathy and indifference, often long term, from the antidepressants. But the person doesn't know it. I had a man come to me on antidepressants who I took a detailed history from. He'd only been on for 2 months. I told him that, well, one of the things we'd work on was his having a life, because he didn't have any life. He didn't go out, he didn't socialize, and so on and so forth. He'd only been on a month or two, and we just took him right off. He came back a week later and described a very active life he had. He hadn't even thought about having his active life on the drug. He couldn't even remember the friends he played cards with. Not that his memory was gone, his engagement was so gone with life, he couldn't describe the fact that he actually had quite an involved social life, even though he was single. The way the antidepressants, and I'm going to try to go drug class by drug class, the way the antidepressants affect people is kind of complicated, but one of the first things that happens is that people sometimes get a little high. I'll read a medical report and it will say the patient came in after a week on the drug or 6 weeks on the drug and says he's never felt better. And the doctor puts exclamation points, bang, bang, bang. Well, that's a terrible sign. That's not a wonderful sign. What does it mean if you're on a drug and you've never felt better in your life? It means you're euphoric. It means you have brain injury that's giving you an unrealistic appraisal of the life that you have been leading, which has been making you miserable. It's not a good sign. The shock doctors do the same thing. The patient gets a euphoric and the doctor writes in the chart, mood improved, instead of symptoms of brain damage showing through. Now, with the antidepressants, that sometimes the euphoria will lead to mania, then you got a real problem. And more often it just goes away. And people go from one antidepressant to another, trying, without even knowing it, to try to get that brief euphoria. Then what gradually happens on the antidepressants, and I'm sure I'm addressing some people in this room, and I want to be as thoughtful about this as I can, is that without knowing it, you start to lose the edge. That spiritual connectivity. And you might just think about whether you do your artwork that you loved as much before, or your music, or if your relationship to God or Jesus, whatever your view is, was as spiritual, or whether you really had the same amount of enjoyment from your children now as you did, if you like taking walks with your dog as much as you used to. Because the eventual effect of the antidepressants, in my experience, and I think this is a fact, is it wears down connectivity, that very special highest quality. In the long run, people can't get off the antidepressants. In the US, we have an estimated 20% or more of women on antidepressants. I think it's mostly because they can't get off. And when they try to get off, they have such terrible dysphoria, pain, suffering, physical, neurological problems that they think they're mentally ill, terribly mentally ill. The doctor says, yeah, you need more of the drug. And you go back on the drug and the anesthesia returns. Now, many of you are going to be functioning really, really well on some of those antidepressants. But I believe if you carefully and thoughtfully come off, you'll discover that there's more to you than you realized. Because the generalized disruption of neurotransmitter systems does not leave us at our very, very best, with our best potential for creativity and happiness. Long term, every class of psychiatric drug, we have evidence not just for biochemical imbalances that remain. But by the way, there are no biochemical imbalances in your brain before you start taking the drugs. Then you get multiple ones, not just one, like Eli Lilly might claim for Prozac. You get multiple imbalances.